To discuss, Michelle, in the news from Senator Rand Paul's marathon to dinner for 21 at the Jefferson. But first things first, Senator Rand Paul won a lot of respect, didn't he?
He sure did. It was riveting TV all through the day and night last night. In fact, Filibuster and Stand with Rand were hashtags on Twitter that were trending not just in the U.S. but worldwide. Here's the Republican Party that has been puzzling about its tarnished brand and trying to figure out a way to reach out to non-traditional constituencies. Well, it happened last night as a result of this incredible show, not just from Rand Paul, but he had backup support from other Tea Party senators, primarily Ted Cruz and then Marco Rubio. And then sometime in the midnight hour, Mitch McConnell finally wandered on to provide support for his fellow Kentuckian.
Sure.
And even if there are internal disagreements among Republicans and conservatives about the actual policy and the extent of what presidential authority should be in wartime, the fact that you had a singular figure grab the platform, the spotlight, seize the narrative, and force a very uncomfortable issue in front of the White House and the world, that's the kind of leadership that a lot of conservatives have been looking for sure.
And it was interesting because officially Washington, D.C. shut down, because of the snowstorm that never was. And yet here's this guy from Kentucky, he went to Washington to stand for something, and he wound up standing there talking for 13 hours because he feels, and I completely agree with him, and well, it's against the Constitution to do what this administration does, and would do hypothetically, and that is you cannot target an American on American soil. And that's why all these politicians, some Democrats along with Republicans, Michelle, stood up with Stand last night. Watch.
I rise today to begin to filibuster John Brennan's nomination for the CIA. I will speak until I can no longer speak.
I'd like to ask your reactions to the testimony that Attorney General...
Senator from Kansas, without yielding the floor if I can.
Most Americans would find it repulsive.
Mr. President, at this time I would entertain a question without yielding the floor from the senator from Oregon.
Instance of an extraordinary threat to our country.
Now I would yield without yielding the floor for another question.
And this will probably be my last question. Before I get to it, let me just say that, all the other senators that are, and I know some.
I have no problem. People want to talk for a long time. It's no problem. I've done it a time or two in my days.
Mr. President, I'd like to thank the senator from Texas for coming to the floor and cheering me up. I was getting kind of tired, and I appreciate bringing news from the outside world. Really, we don't want to have a standard where someone who we think might be a terrorist or we think might be engaged in something who's in a restaurant eating dinner would be killed.
And I think that's something every member of this body should care about. It's not a Republican question, not a conservative question.
I've told them that I will remove myself from the blockage of John Brennan's nomination as soon as we get some clarification from the White House. I'm still... Absolutely, we're not going to be killing Americans not in a combat situation, that we will obey the Constitution, that the Fifth Amendment does apply to all Americans, and there aren't exceptions. But I thank you very much for the forbearance, and I yield the floor.
And
well, that was last night.
Hours.
Yeah, that was almost 1 a.m. last night. So, Michelle, what do you think about this poll? It's a little broad in the questioning. Should the president have authority to use drones to kill Americans on U.S. soil? 63% say no, 32% say yes. But that, I guess you could parse out that question. If they're a known terrorist or, does that change it for you at all?
Yeah, this is an incredibly complex issue.
No doubt.
Gretchen. And the unfortunate reality is that there was so little debate because these Democrats have been so scared out of their pants to confront the issue because it's a loser for Obama and his narrative. Dick Durbin crept up onto the fore briefly to try and get clarity about some very basic policy issues about non-combatant versus combatant, and imminent threat is really what's important here. And if you added that wording to the question, it would be interesting to see
exactly
what the change is in popular opinion on this. Because as many Republicans who actually support a wide discretion during the war on terror under Bush have pointed out, I mean, Vice President Cheney had put orders in to shoot down Flight 93, which had a couple of hundred American citizens on board. And Rand Paul actually answered that question from Dick Durbin. These are the kind of questions that the White House needs to be answering. But as we pointed out on Twitchy last night, what was he doing? The White House and Obama were posting pictures of snow day, frolicking around, you know, in all of the fluffy snow, while the Senate Republicans were hating up the floor.
Right. And Michelle, you mentioned Dick Cheney and everything. They can get an agreement on this. Everybody knows the challenge of the president with this war. If Adam Gadon shows up in New Mexico tomorrow, I want to kill him any way we can. And he's an American that went to the Taliban. But I want to bring you to dinner last night, which we were not invited to, with the president and 20 Republican senators. First off, your take on this, a legitimate handout to Republicans?
Well, definitely some kind of end run around the Republican leadership here. I'm terrified to think of what the likes of Lindsey Graham and John McCain have been cooking up with Obama behind the scenes at dinners like this. Hopefully they.
Why are you concerned?
Because I think that we are on the road to the very kind of shamnesty that McCain had wanted under the previous administration. And these are the kinds of things that ought to be debated, as they were last night on the Senate floor, in transparent light. And look, we know that this kind of politicking goes on all the time, but there is a huge disparity now, and this is a very stark contrast between the Tea Party grassroots conservatives taking it to the floor, taking it to the Obama, and the old guard, the mashed potatoes, as somebody put it on Twitter last night, of these old Senate Republicans doing the old way of doing business,
but isn't it
dealing with the enemy.
Isn't it at least, is it somewhat disingenuous to not at least give President Obama at least a little bit of credit for reaching out? I mean, I know it's 5 years later and he's been reelected, and he could have done it a long time ago.
He did have a really bad week last
night.
night.
Well, that's kind of the point, Gretchen. I mean, what has this guy done with the olive branch? He's either hidden it somewhere in a closet or used it and wielded it. What does he do? He pretends that he's reaching out, and then he takes that olive branch and beats them over the heads with it.
Unless he has no other choice. I'm optimistic Paul Ryan's coming over for lunch, which he's probably going to be a little full because they had a late dinner. And so maybe they're going to, and tomorrow, next week, it's meeting with John Boehner and some House members. So maybe things are going to change. Let's be optimistic. Let's see.
All right. And meanwhile, Michelle, let's tell you about this. The State Department is going to apparently honor what looks like an anti-Semite and a 9/11 supporter. Here is a tweet that Samira Ibrahim sent out. Quote, an explosion on a bus carrying Israelis in Burgas Airport in Bulgaria on the Black Sea. Today is a very sweet day with a lot of very sweet news. That doesn't seem like the kind of person we should be honoring. There's her photograph right there.
Yeah, and that's really the nicest example of her vitriol on Twitter. The Weekly Standard has the rundown that week of the September 11th anniversary, while we were suffering the losses of our personnel in Benghazi, she was gloating that she wanted every 9/11 to be an event where America was, quote, burning. And now this woman is being honored as some sort of freedom fighter and leader. Why should this be any surprise, of course, from a State Department and a White House that rolls out the welcome mat for the likes of the Muslim Brotherhood and all sorts of other anti-Semitic, pro-jihadi advocates and operatives?
Yeah, and where's the rest of the mainstream media? Why aren't they talking about this? If this was a Republican administration, you got to figure, big story.
Yeah, no question about it. But, you know, unfortunately, State Departments under both administrations have had these proclivities of reaching out to the very wrong kind of people who pose as moderate Muslims.
Sure. Don't they have Google over there? All right. Michelle Malkin, the proprietor of Twitchy.com and MichelleMalkin.com, we thank you very much. Have a great week.
You bet. You too.
Bye-bye.